friends, welcome back to my kitchen. If you're new here, my name is Jen. I do cooking, canning, and food preservation videos once a week, and sometimes I do vlogs on Friday. If that seems like the sort of content you'd be into, I hope you'll consider subscribing and sticking around. Today is not really a recipe or a tutorial. I just wanted to share something new that I was trying with you. And I'm going to be making kind of a decorative pie. Now, because my focus on this pie was not necessarily the crust or the filling, I did shortcut. I used store-bought pie crust for this, which normally I do that anyway because I don't really have time to make pie crusts. But I used store-bought pie crust and I also used store-bought pie filling. Now, for about a year now, I have been watching another creator on TikTok, and I believe her name is the Blair Witch, or now she might just go by Blair. But she makes these absolutely stunning pies that are so beautiful, and she has so much skill that I have been wanting to try that. So recently I found some silicone candy molds on Amazon. They were on sale because of Halloween, and I picked them up and I thought that I could use those to help make the decorations for the top of a pie. Now, I've made a few pies on my channel since I've been on YouTube, and I like to kind of pretty them up a little bit. But making the really ornate pies is something that I would really like to get good at that because I enjoy baking pretty pies. I know it's just superficial, but there's something so satisfying about looking at a pie that almost looks like a piece of art. So, I'm trying to follow the pattern of a few of the other YouTube channels that I follow recently where they're learning new skills. Um, and I think that there's nothing wrong with that. So I'm bringing you guys along for this today. It might be a success and it might be an absolute, total, and utter failure. But if you don't try, you'll never know if you can do it or not. And I'm sure that with more practice, I'll get a lot better at this over time. And who knows, maybe one of you will learn something from the mistakes that I made or the successes that I had making this pie today, and you might decide to try to do this too. So, here are some of the molds that I picked up from Amazon. I really like spooky things, even when it's not spooky season, so I absolutely had to grab the skull and the bat wings. And then I got a lot of really just fancy flourishes. It was like a mixed bag. The pink ones all came in one set, and the skull and the wings came in another set. So they were pretty reasonably priced. I think I paid like $3 or $4 for them. It wasn't much at all. But at this point, I was just kind of mulling over how I was going to do this. I don't have the fancy silicone molds that Blair has. These are kind of thin, kind of small. I've never done this before. So I wasn't sure if I needed to stamp them on the pie crust and cut them out, or if I was going to be able to press the pie crust into the molds and then scrape off the excess. So I'm just kind of trying to work it out in my head here how I'm going to do this. My first and foremost concern was that all of these designs, because I didn't do a double crust pie, that my little designs that I cut out and lay on top would sink down into the pie filling while it cooked. And I kind of thought about going ahead and baking the pie till it was almost done, so that the pie filling would set up a little bit, and then putting the cutouts on top. But then I thought, well, what if I just go ahead and make kind of a lattice system for all of my cutouts to sit on top of? Something that if it sank, it was no big deal. It would keep all of my designs kind of above the fruit level. So that's what I did. So I kind of ended up with this star pattern, kind of spiderweb pattern, that I'll lay over the top of the pie to support all the little decorative pieces. Now, in the end, you could still see the lattice work underneath. So next time I try to do this particular style where it's just a one crust pie, what I will probably do is I will do this little star pattern again, but I will press it down just below the surface of the fruit. That way you can't see it from the top, but there's still some kind of support structure for the things that I lay on the surface. Now, I tried to work out, do I need a thick piece of dough? Like I doubled it over, tripled it over, rolled it out, pressed it into the mold, and I fiddled around with it for a little while until I felt like I got a really good uh, press out of it that was thick enough that it would hold up to baking. Like it wouldn't curl up on itself or burn because it was too thin. And after doing this a couple of times, I found a method that kind of worked really well. Basically, I just cut a strip of the pie dough and doubled it over on itself and rolled it out a little bit with the rolling pin or pressed it out with my fingers. I pressed it into the mold and then I used a really sharp knife to cut around the design and cut it free from all of the excess dough. Now, this was pretty time intensive. This took me quite a while to get all of these pieces cut out. And I kind of went back and forth between tools to see what worked the best. As you can see, I started with a sharp knife. I ended up using a butter knife. It left little jagged edges, so I just kind of patted them in to smooth the edges of the beak there. But they do sell clay carving kits, so I've decided that in the future, if I want to continue trying to do this sort of thing, I'm going to purchase an inexpensive clay sculpting kit so that it has some little tools that I can get nice and tight in around the design. Because here you see I did the edges for the pie crust, and I could have gotten a lot closer to the actual scroll work of the design if I had had a finer or smaller tool to work with. It was all trial and error at this point. I really had no idea what I wanted my design to look like, so I'm kind of mapping it out on that piece of parchment I have next to my work surface. And once I get it exactly the way I want it, then I'll transfer it one piece at a time over to the actual pie. But yeah, so I'm just working my way through this, kind of trying to imagine how I'd like it to look in the end and getting everything all lined up and ready to go. One thing that I decided I would do next time I make this is because it takes so long to cut these individual little pieces out. I mean, at this point, you can't tell, but I was sitting in a chair. I had pulled a chair up to the counter and I was just cutting them out one at a time and trying to set them up over on the side. But the time it took me to get everything cut out, my pie crust, actually, the dough, did dry out a little bit. So you'll see at the end, and I'll be sure to point it out for you, but because it started to dry out, it made it very hard to get the pieces to bond together. There was a little bit of lifting and separating around the edges of the pie. So next time I do this, I will cover them up, all of my little pieces, with a damp paper towel or a damp towel, just to keep them malleable. Because while it looks good here, you'll see at the end, every section of this crest, which was beautiful, but every section of it separated. It had a little line between each piece where it was just too dry to get it to stick to each other. So definitely want to keep your pie dough moist if you can, if at all possible. So now's the fun part where I just go around and try to decide where I want everything, where it looks best. As I said before, I had a lot of empty spaces, so I decided to take whatever pie dough I had left over and make some little roses, which is really easy. You just make little circles and you wrap them around each other and shape them with your thumbs. And I kind of stuck those in the voids. Now, you can still see there's some lines here from that trellising that I did, which doesn't look so great. You could just poke it down with a chopstick or something, I imagine. But for a first attempt, I was not disappointed. Now, next time I make this pie, I am going to do an egg wash over just the designs because as you can see, they didn't really brown evenly because of the different heights. It was still a delicious pie. It was absolutely pretty to look at, but it wasn't what I wanted. So if at first you don't succeed, try again. You can see around the edges of the crust where it's separated, where I said that the dough had gotten too dry. So that was a problem. That was one thing that I learned. Keep your dough moist and sink the trellising. If you think that you will have a problem with stuff sinking, You could just do this as a double crust pie and put your designs on top of that and only egg wash the designs. I think this is a really fun idea for the holidays, and not just like Halloween for spooky pies or whatever, but for Thanksgiving, you could put leaves around the edges of the pie instead of a fluted pie crust. Christmas, you could do cutouts of Christmas stuff, and I will absolutely reuse these silicone molds to make candies to decorate cakes and things like that. So I hope that you guys try to do something like this and step out of your comfort zone. And if you do, let me know how it went. Until next time, friends, happy cooking.